Welcome back, and joining me for a closer look at what's played out on the market scene today is Imtiaz Suliman from Sentio Capital. Thank you so much for your time, Imtiaz. Of course, we are all still digesting Trump's tariff threats, and the latest ones are being directed at the European Union and particularly the alcohol companies. We did see pressure, a lot of pressure on those stocks. I was actually wondering if we'd see any on the counters that are on the JSE, but nothing really happening there. And I'm wondering if these tariffs were to be imposed, if it wouldn't affect any of the JSE counters or any of the JSE counters that are exposed to alcohol.
Yeah, thanks, Anati. I think what this tariff war is essentially doing is creating lots of uncertainty. So markets are finding it very difficult to find any direction. We saw the PPI numbers come out of the US today, and although they were slightly below market expectations, the tariff narrative still dominates the overall theme of the market. So in terms of any direct exposure to the JSE, I think, we have Anheuser that's listed here. They might be a beneficiary if we don't get hit with the tariffs, but that, that could be a part of the uptick that we see. But overall, I think this tariff threats from Trump is just dominating, and that's creating a lot of uncertainty, which makes it difficult for investors, but also for the Fed. So we've got the Fed meeting coming up, and I think they're also going to adopt a wait-and-see approach of how this plays out.
Yeah. All right. Well, let us go into the JSE counters that have come out with numbers. Of course, we are still in the middle of results season here back at home. Starting off with the Standard Bank, they came out with their annual numbers today. Headline earnings per share ticking up 4%. Credit impairment charges declining, which is good news. Also, rewarding shareholders with an increased dividend. Stock popping over 5%. What were investors encouraged by there?
Yeah, I think the result was guided, but the outlook was much better. So they're guiding for earnings growth to be between 8 and 12% going forward, and rather than the 10% that we've been accustomed to in the past. And the ROE targets have also been increased to between 18 and 22% from a return on equity perspective. So overall, although it was single-digit growth, they're still managing to grow in a tough economy. And this is a theme that we've seen come out of the banks, whereby costs are very well managed. So the cost to income ratio declined. And then we've seen the credit loss ratios also decline on the back of that. So, from a consumer perspective, the consumer that is lending and that they've chose to lend to has been in a better shape. And that has played out. So we've seen that cost of business come down. And from a lending perspective, once there's a bit more confidence in the economy, I think you'll see lending starting to pick up, which will help the net interest income line, which has been quite muted across all of the banks and also in Standard Bank's case.
Well, something that is not in shape is the earnings coming out of Exxaro. Even though we did have the revenue line ticking up, that didn't filter through to the bottom line. We had headline earnings per share there dropping by 36%. But the stock shooting up 4% initially. Just drill into those numbers for us.
Yeah, I think the overall positive was the appointment of a permanent CEO. And that was in the form of Ben Magara, who is now the CEO. And he comes with experience both in the coal business. So he was at Anglo Coal and he was at Lonmin as well. So very well versed in the mining sphere. And I think that certainty is what the market was looking for. It was a short process to appoint a permanent CEO. He was part of the board as a non-executive director, so he knows the business quite well. And then if you look at Exxaro from an overall perspective, they've got quite a strong balance sheet with 16 billion rand of cash. And I think the concern there is really, what do they do with that cash? They've been talking about buying and diversifying into other adjacent businesses. And there's always risk when one deploys that capital. Do they overpay for an asset? Do they go into a sector that they don't know as much? So I think that concern still remains with Exxaro.
All right. Well, let's get into Advotech. Of course, we've now had We're having all the private education counters listed on the JSE coming out with their numbers. Advotech came out with a year-end trading statement. Not much color, just that the diversified private education company expects its headline earnings per share to jump by as much as 18%. We did see the share climbing 3%. Talk to me about what investors saw here.
Yeah, I think overall, if you look at what Curo came out with, that was a bit on the light side, where they said student numbers actually declined. So although Advotech is guiding for an increase in earnings, I think that's coming on the back of higher learner numbers, but also lower bad debt charges from an overall perspective. So they seem to be doing a bit better. We need to see the detail and dive into it to see what's driving this earnings growth. But I think if you look at it just from an overall headline perspective, I would expect the bad debt number to have come down and them to also have increased their overall student numbers rather than seeing a decline.
All right. Well, let's get into your stock pick for today. Imtiaz, what are you choosing?
Yeah, I'm going with Raubex. Raubex is an infrastructure play in South Africa, and it has operations in Australia as well, and a bit in the UK. So if you look at it, they play in the roads business and as well as construction materials, mining. They're quite well diversified, but order books have grown quite significantly over the last few years, and they're at record highs in terms of that order book. I think as government's spending plans come through for infrastructure, Raubex is very well positioned to benefit from that spend, although those contracts need to be awarded. And once they're awarded, Raubex executes very well. So margins have been trending upwards, both on a construction perspective as well as in the road and earthworks business. And they, pay out their dividends. And I think you should see quite good earnings growth on the back of this uptick in infrastructures.
All right, thank you so much for your time and for your analysis on what has moved investors' money today, Imtiaz. That was Imtiaz Suliman from Sentio Capital.